Welcome back to another Java programming class. In today's class, we are going to see layouts in swings. We are going to see what are layouts, what is a layout manager, and which are the different types of layout managers which are available in swings. So before we proceed, let's look at what is the meaning of saying layout. We are familiar that containers in swing contain different components. Now, when I place a component inside a container, there are few things I need to know. One is the size of the component. What is the width of this component and what is the height of this component? And the next thing that I need to know is where is the location at which this component is going to be placed. Is it going to be placed right at the top left corner, or is it going to be placed at the bottom right corner? Now suppose if I put one more component, what will be the size of it? What is the position of it in respect to the other component? These all refers to the layout. So let's look at what is the meaning of saying layout. So layout refers to arranging the components in a particular manner. It also refers to the position of these components, their size of this component, and how one component is placed with respect to the other. There are different schemes are available in swings that we can use to arrange the component. Now whenever we place a component in a container, we can set the size of the component. We can say what is the width of this component, what is the height of this component. However, the layout manager will decide the actual size and actual position of the component with respect to the other component. In other words, when I place one component and the next component, whether that component will follow the first component, or whether the component will come in the separate row, or whether the component will be placed at some other location, they are all decided by the layout managers. Now, what are these layout manager? Now layout manager in swing is an interface. We are all familiar in Java. We have two things, either we have a class or we have an interface. So all those classes which implement the layout manager interface are referred to the layout manager. Now what is the use of this layout manager? Layout manager help us in placing the component within the containers. They determine the size of the component, their position of the component within the container. However, we can also set the size and the position of the other component. However, when we use the layout manager, it is the layout manager that will decide the overall size of the component and its location within the container. Now let's look at what are the different ways in which we can arrange the component. Now the different ways in which we can arrange the component in Java is decided by the different layout manager. Generally, there are 6 main types of layout manager which are available in Java. The first one is the flow layout, and this is the simplest one. Second one is the border layout. The next one is the grid layout. The fourth one is the grid bag layout. Fifth one is the box layout, and finally the sixth one is the card layout. Now let's look at each and every one of them one after the other. Now what is flow layout? Now before we venture into what is it, what is a flow layout, let's look at how we write something on a sheet of paper. Now let's assume that this is a sheet of paper and I want to write something on this sheet of paper. So I'm going to start by writing right at the top of the page. So I'm going to say this is my first sentence. So when I do that thing, so you notice that the words are coming one after the other. The letter that I type comes one after the other in a straight line. Now I am coming closer to the end of this line. Let me write some other words over here. Now you notice that I have reached the end of this particular line. So what we do when we reach to the end of the line, we simply go to the next line. So let me continue over here. This is my second line. Let me continue. I am going to, now if you notice over here, when I write I'm going, I have again reached the next line. That is the end of the second line. Now what am I supposed to do? I am supposed to go to the next line over here. So I'm going to continue writing. I'm going to say write third sentence. So I've written a few things over here. You will notice one thing, that when I start writing, you notice that I am going from the left side of this particular line to the end. So I'm going to just put an arrow indicating the direction in which I am writing. So I start from the left, I go to the end of this line. Once I reach the end of the line, I start with the second line, and then I continue writing in the second line. So I start writing from the left corner of the second line, and I keep on writing until I reach the end of the line. Then I go to the next line. Okay, so my flow is from the left corner over here. So I start from the left, I reach up to the right, and then I go down. So this is from left to right, and then from top to bottom. Now let's imagine I have my container in swing. Now I want to place some components inside this container. How am I going to place these components? So in the flow layout, the first component that you're going to place is going to come right at the beginning of the first line over here. So you place the first component. The next component is going to go immediately after this to the right side. So the next component is going to go here. Now the size of this component may be smaller or larger. So if you notice over here, I have few sentences which may be smaller or which may be larger. So similarly, depending upon the component that you are placing, the size may vary. Let me put one more component. So I have my third component, I have my fourth component. Now once we reach to the end of the first line, the component will be placed in the beginning of the second row, and we keep on adding different component. Again, they are going to flow in the direction from the left to the right hand side. So once they reach to the end of the row, and if the component cannot be fitted within that row, it flows to the next row, and it keeps on continuing. So you notice over here that our components are placed from the left to the right and from the top to the bottom, and this kind of layout is called as flow layout. Now let's look at what is flow layout. So a flow layout is nothing but it's a way in which the components are arranged like words on a page. Okay, so from the left to right, from the top to the bottom. So the components are placed from left to the right, until there is no more space that is left over within that row, and then the component will start moving to the next and again continue from left to right. Now one thing that we can do is, when we place a component, we can put the spaces between the component. I can bring the component very close together, or I can put some spaces between one component and the other component, or between one row and the next row. So I can place over here, I can specify what will be the space between the component. So this I can do it within the flow layout. Okay. Now how do the components are placed within the container? Now within the container, the components are placed in the order in which you place the component. So the first component will come first, then the next component will immediately follow it, then the next component will immediately follow, and so on and so forth. Okay. We can arrange, or we can align the component in a different way. For example, suppose you have a container here. I can say that the component is going to start from the center. Center means it's going to come right at the center of it. Or I can say the component should be aligned to the left side, or I can say that the component can be aligned to the right hand side, and so on and so forth. In other words, I can also specify the alignment of the component with respect to the rows within the container. Now let's look at the demonstration about how to use these components. Now what I have here is a NetBeans project that I have just created. Now let me add a component into this. So before I add it, let me specify here that this is a Jframe that I have added. I'm going to right click on this Jframe, and you notice that the NetBeans is going to give you a lot of options over here. There are a lot of options which are available, and the one that I have selected here is the flow layout. You can see that it is highlighted over here. For the Jframe, the default layout is the border layout. Okay, that will be the default. There are other layout which I have not mentioned in my slide. If the time permits, I'm going to talk about them slightly later. Now once I've set the flow layout, let me start adding the component. So I'm going to place a button here. So I'm going to just drag a button, and I'm going to just place it here. Now in this case, the component is arranged at the center. You notice that I have a placeholder there in the dotted line that shows where the component is going to be placed. So when I place a component here, you notice that the component fits right at the middle. Now suppose if I drag one more button, you will notice that I can place this button to the left hand side. So when I place this button, you notice that these two together are occupying the center. So they are centered, aligned center. Now if I put one more button, so I'm going to drag one more button and I'm going to place it here, and you notice that they are also centered. Now you notice that there is no space for adding the next button over here. So if I drag one more button and if I place that button over here, you will notice that the button simply goes to the next. The reason for this is its size is varying. So I'm going to slightly move the move it a bit. So now you notice that when there is no space, the component simply goes to the next. In other words, it flows to the next line or next row. The same thing is true if I add one more button. You will notice that the component still comes next. So this way I can add the component. Now this is good in NetBeans. You can always drag and drop, but how can I do the same thing in Java coding? So how can I write a code to get the flow layout? Now what I've done over here is I have just added a Java class over here called demo Java, and I'm going to go to the demo Java class over here, and then I'm going to write, you notice over there, this is just an ordinary class over here. I don't have anything in this class. Let me create a Jframe here. So I'm going to say Jframe JF equal to new Jframe. So I have this Jframe here. I'm going to give a title to this particular Jframe, and I'm going to say this is flow layout demo. Okay, I've just put a few things, and you know very well, whenever you create a frame, few things you need to do is you set the size of it. So let me set the size as 300 cross 300. Also you can set the default close operation, which is Jframe. When I close that thing, what I'm supposed to do, Jframe dot exit on close. Also, in order for me to show that particular frame, I'm going to say Jframe set visible is true. So this is the general housekeeping that you are supposed to do it. Now let me go ahead and let me add the layout for it. So I'm going to go to my Jframe, and I'm going to say, to set the layout, we have this set layout, okay, and we are supposed to specify the layout manager. In this case, I can specify the layout manager as new layout manager. So the new flow layout manager. I'm going to use that particular thing. Now you notice that by default there are three constructors which are available. The first one does not take anything. Second one takes the alignment, that is, you can have the left alignment, right alignment, or center alignment, and there are other leading and trailing alignment that we are going to see later. In the second option, I have alignment. Apart from that, I have the horizontal gap, that is space with horizontal space between the component, and then I have the vertical gap, that is space between the vertical space between the component. I'm going to start with the simplest one, that is the flow layout without anything. Okay, so once I've set this particular thing here, what I can do is I'm going to go and add a button to this. So I'm going to say Jframe dot add, and I'm going to say new J button. So I'm going to say new J button, and then I'm going to set the button name as first. Let me simply run this particular thing. Now before I run it, I'm going to just show you that I have done some homework here, and in that what I've done is in the main method I've created a runnable class of runnable interface. That means I'm creating a separate thread and I'm running it in a separate thread. So this you are supposed to do it for any GUI application. I've talked much about it in the other videos. You can always watch them. Now let me run this one and let's see how it's going to appear. Now if you notice over here, the first component that I have placed is going to come right at the middle. Let me add the second component, and when you add the second component, you will notice here that I'm going to add the second button, in fact. So I'll give a name to this one as my second button. So this is simple as that. And then I'm going to simply run this one. When I run this particular thing, you will notice that those two are occupying the center. And you notice that the size of them are varying. So you notice the first one has a smaller size. So it's going to occupy the size, the minimum size that is required to show the component. Now suppose if I put the third button over here. So if I copy this one and if I put the third button, so I'm going to just put the third button here. I will run this again, and you notice that when I run this third button, you notice that it is again coming at the center. Now let me give some alignment for the component. Now you notice that these components are coming aligned at the center of the container. Now let me go to the flow layout over here, and in the flow layout I have my second constructor, which is going to take the alignment. Now what are the alignments that we have over here? Let's look at that. So I'm going to use the constant over here, flow layout dot, I have different alignments. So I have the center, left, right, trailing and leading. Now center is a constant and its value is 1. Similarly, left is a constant whose value is 0, and right is a constant whose value is 2, as well as leading is a constant whose value is 3, integer value, and trailing is one more whose value is integer value is 4. I'm going to go with the left alignment. So I'll select flow layout, and what I've done over here is I put the alignment as left alignment. Now if I run this particular thing, you will notice that it's going to appear as left aligned component. So in this case you will notice that all the components are aligned to the left hand side. Now if I reduce the size, you will notice that the components are aligned to the left hand side. Now if I still reduce it, it's going to align to the left hand side. The same thing is true if I go and if I change the alignment as right. Suppose if I make the alignment as right alignment, and if I run this particular thing, you will notice that all the components are aligned to the right hand side. So you notice I'm reducing the size, and you notice that all of them are right aligned. That is true if I do the center alignment. Now if I go over here and if I use the center alignment, and if I run this particular thing, you will notice that all the components are aligned in the center. Now I'm going to drag it over here. When I reduce the size, you notice that the components are arranged in the center. So they are coming at the center over here, and if I reduce the size further, you'll notice that the components are actually aligned at the center. Now there are two other options which are available. One is the leading and trailing. Now this before I explain about the leading and trailing, let me go to the second option that I have it over here, and that refers to the horizontal alignment and the vertical alignment. So you notice that horizontal gap and the vertical gap, so gap between the component, I am going to give 5 pixels for each and every one of them. So let me run it and let me show you how is it going to appear. Now you notice that you may not find much of a difference. So I am simply going to make this one as 30 pixel and 30 pixel. So let's see how is it going to look like. Now if I run this particular thing, you will notice that the components are aligned 30 pixel. I'm going to just drag it just to show you that. So between them, the gap between them is 30 pixel. So between one and the next component, this gap that you see over here, this gap is 30 pixel. The same thing is true. This gap is 30 pixel. Okay. So now if I bring that component down, so this is the horizontal. What about vertical? Now this vertical refers to, let me center this form. Now this vertical refers to the gap between these two. So this gap, so what you see over here, this particular gap, this gap is now 30 pixel. And naturally this gap is also 30 pixel. So you have 30 pixel here, 30 pixel between. So this is vertical gap and this is the horizontal, and this will be the vertical gap. Now just to highlight it slightly a bit, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make one of them as 60 pixels so that it's going to appear much a gap is going to appear between them. So when I run it, you notice that here you will notice the strange thing. This gap is 30 pixel, no doubt about it. So this gap is 30 pixel and this gap is 60 pixel. So this is how you can specify the space between the component. Now let me come back to the two other alignment options which were available with the flow layout. I'm going to remove both of them. As of now, I'm going to remove both of them. Now, by the way, if you look at the alignment over here, so you have the vertical gap, the gap between them. So there is no default as such they have specified. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to go to the leading and trailing. So what is the meaning of saying leading and what's the meaning of saying trailing? So let's look at what does they say. So this value indicates that each row of component should be justified to the leading edge of the container's orientation. For example, to the left in left to right operations. So there are a few things that you need to know over here. First one is it's going to say how the components will be aligned with respect to the container's orientation. And you notice over here there is something called as component orientation. If you click on it, you'll get more information about the component orientation. And component orientation class encapsulates the language sensitive orientation that is to be used to order the elements of the components or of the text. Okay, so how these components has to be aligned. Now in order to demonstrate this particular thing, it's not easy to demonstrate that the whole thing, how it's going to appear. I'm going to do slight modification to my code. Before that, I'm going to explain what I'm going to do. So I have this frame layout and I am going to put two J panels inside it. So again, recall from your previous videos that J panel is also a container that can be placed within the other container. So I'm going to put one J panel in the first row and the second J panel in the second row. Now I want first J panel to appear in the first row and the second one to be appeared on the second row. In order to do that thing, I am going to change the layout of this container to be a grid. You know very well the meaning of saying grid. The grid, when we talk about, I'm going to talk more about it. So grid is nothing but you have this, so rows and column. This kind of thing is called as grid layout, wherein you place the component in these locations. Okay, so that's what I want. I'm going to create a grid with 2 rows and single column. So how do I do that thing? I will explain about the grid layout slightly later. So I'm going to set the layout of this thing, that is the grid layout. So I'm going to take this flow layout as of now, and I'm going to use the grid layout. Okay, so I'm going to use the grid layout. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to say grid layout, and in the grid layout, okay, so you have, so not this group layout, sorry, I want the grid layout. So we have this grid layout, and I'm going to specify the number of rows is 2 and number of columns is equal to 1. So what did I do over here is, so what is that I'm doing is, I'm going to go over here and I'm going to create one column, and I'm going to divide it into 2 rows. So this will be the first row, the second one will be the second row. In this, I'm going to place a panel here as well as a panel here. Within this panel, I'm going to put a label on 2 sides. So this is simple as that. Okay, and I'm going to specify the flow layout for both the grids. So let me do that thing. So as I do it, I'm going to explain to you what I'm going to do. So let me create a J panel. So I've created a J panel. So how do I create a J panel? I've removed the previous one. The reason is it's not required. So I'm going to create a J panel. I'm going to call it as J1 equal to new J panel. So I create a J panel. Okay, and I'm going to specify the layout for this as flow layout. So within this, I'm going to specify the flow layout. Okay, and within that, I'm going to specify flow layout dot leading. So first one, I put it as leading. Okay, I will create a new instance of it. Okay, so everything is done. Then within this one, I'm going to now set the component orientation of this as component orientation left to right. So for the panel, I've set the component layout like this. Then I'm going to create go to this panel, and I'm going to add, like the same thing, I'm going to add new J label. So I'm going to create a new J label, and I'm going to give it a name for this one as leading. Okay, then finally I'm going to add this JF dot add the panel. So what I have done, so again if you didn't get it, so what I've done is I have the Jframe, the bigger one. I have divided it into two sections. Okay, so this will be the row 1, this will be the row 2. Okay, within the row I have added a J panel. Okay, so this is what I have done. I have created a J panel here. If you notice, I have created a J panel here. So I created a new J panel. Okay, and finally I am adding it. I've done that thing. Okay, for this J panel, I am setting the flow layout, and the orientation that I am going to use for this is the leading. Not only that, I am putting one more constraint to this J panel, and the constraint that I am going to put is I am saying that the components are placed from left to right. So the components that the label that I am going to add, so the label that I have created over here, so the label that I am adding to this has to be placed from the left to the right. So I am going to place a label here. So I'm going to place the label from the left to the right. So I'm going to place the label here from the left to the right. In the same way, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go and put one more panel below this. So I'm going to put one more panel below this, and I'm also going to put the layout, okay, flow layout, but I'm going to make this flow layout as trailing. So instead of leading, I'm going to go for the second one, I'm going to make it as trailing, and the orientation I'm going to place it as left to right, and I'm going to put a label here even into this one. So this is what I'm going to do it. So let's follow and let's do that particular thing. So I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to go and copy this whole thing, because I don't want to type that whole thing again. Only few changes. First thing is I'm going to change everything to J panel 2, because I'm adding the second panel. So J panel 2 and J panel 2. So this makes the difference. And in the previous one I have used the leading. Now I'm going to use the other one, and that is trailing. Okay, so first panel was leading, second one is trailing. Also I have put the label text as leading here, and I'm going to put the text here as trailing. Okay, so let's look at how this is going to appear. So when I run this one, this is what it's going to appear. So you'll notice a few things. First is a few details over here. First thing is within this whole thing, okay, this is my entire Jframe. So this whole thing is my Jframe. Okay, and I have divided it into two panels. One panel is appearing at the top. The second panel, even though I have not set the border and so on, I don't want to make the things too complicated. So I have put two J panels. You notice over here I have added the first J panel here. You notice this is J panel 1. Okay, second one is J panel 2. I have added two J panels here. So this is what I have done. And for the top one, I am setting the flow layout, and I am setting the layout option as leading. So the top one I am setting it as leading. For the second one I am setting the flow layout again, but I am setting the layout as trailing. Okay, in both the cases the components are added from left to right. So you notice that in both the cases the components are added from left to right. So there is no change as such. The components are added from the left to right. And I have taken two labels. This is one label that is added here. This is the second label that is added here. Okay, so what is the outcome of this? So outcome of it is, when you say left to right alignment, okay, leading flow layout leading alignment means it's going to appear here. So when you are adding from left to right, so you are adding component left to right. Leading means it's going to be left, because you are adding from the left to right. So this is leading. Okay, what about the trailing? So trailing, when you add it from the left to right, so you are adding the component from left to right. Trailing means it's going to appear at the right side. So left leading, right trailing. Okay, now I change this orientation. That means adding component, I have started adding from left to the right, and I'm going to add it from the right to left. So only change I'm going to do now is I will change the component orientation here, and I'm going to remove this, and I'm going to say right to left. In the both the case, right to left. Okay, there is no difference. Run it now and you will notice a strange thing now. So what is the strange thing? When you are adding the component from right to the left, so suppose if you are adding the component from right to left, so you are adding from the right to left, leading means to the right side, because you are adding from right to left. So leading is right side, trailing is left, because you are adding the component from the right side, you are adding the component. So from the right to the left, you are adding the component from right to left. So the leading will be left, trailing will be right. So these are the two additional options that are available for you in the flow layout. So this is all about our flow layout. Let's come back to the flow layout. Now then, so where do we use it? So for your panels and applets, this is the default layout. So this will be the default layout. Whether you, what is the meaning of saying default layout? Whether you specify it or not, these two are going to appear. So for the panel as well as the applet, this will be the default layout. Now let's go to the next layout, and that is the border layout.